Passover, also known as Pesach in Hebrew, is a major Israel holiday that commemorates the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in ancient Egypt, as narrated in the biblical book of Exodus. It is celebrated annually for 8 days, starting on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Nisan, which typically falls in March or April in the Gregorian calendar. During Passover, Jewish people engage in various traditions, including the removal of chametz, leavened bread, from their homes, the consumption of matzah, unleavened bread, the retelling of the Exodus story during the Seder meal, and the prohibition of eating certain foods such as leavened bread and grains. The centerpiece of Passover observance is the Seder, a special ceremonial meal held on the first 2 nights of the holiday, outside of Israel, where it is observed for 7 days. The Seder plate contains symbolic foods that represent different aspects of the Exodus story, such as bitter herbs, to symbolize the bitterness of slavery, carousel, a mixture of fruits and nuts symbolizing the mortar used by the Israelite slaves, and a lamb shank bone, symbolizing the paschal sacrifice. Passover is not only a time for celebrating freedom and redemption, but also for reflecting on the themes of oppression, liberation, and the universal struggle for freedom. It is a time for families and communities to come together, retell the story of the Exodus, and reaffirm their commitment to the values of justice, compassion, and freedom. Passover is one of the most important Israeli and Messianic holiday, commemorating the Israelites' liberation from slavery in ancient Egypt as narrated in the biblical book of Exodus. It typically lasts for 8 days, though the observance varies slightly depending on location and tradition. The word Pesach means to pass over in Hebrew, referring to the angel of death passing over the houses of the Israelites during the 10th plague in Egypt, sparing their firstborns. The holiday is celebrated annually during the Hebrew month of Nisan, usually falling in March or April on the Gregorian calendar. Removing chametz. Before Pesach begins, all households thoroughly clean their homes to remove all chametz, leavened products. This is done to commemorate the haste with which the Israelites left Egypt, not allowing time for their bread to rise. Eating matzah. During Pesach, the consumption of chametz is prohibited, and instead, matzah, unleavened bread, is eaten. Matzah symbolizes the haste with which the Israelites left Egypt and their subsequent freedom from slavery. The Seder. The Seder is a special meal held on the first 2 nights of Pesach. It includes the retelling of the Exodus story, consumption of symbolic foods, such as bitter herbs and carousel, and recitation of blessings and songs from the Haggadah, a text specifically written for the Seder plate. The Seder plate contains symbolic foods representing different aspects of the Exodus story, including maror, bitter herbs, carousel, a mixture of fruits and nuts, karpas, a green vegetable. No egg, why? The egg has become the Jewish Easter of the fertility symbolism. In certain Jewish communities, the egg is seen as a symbol of fertility and the cycle of life. It may represent the idea of continuity and the promise of future generations. Medieval custom. Some sources suggest that the custom of placing an egg on the Seder plate dates back to medieval times in certain European Jewish communities. The egg may have been included as a symbol of sustenance and as a reminder of the festive nature of the meal. Pesach is not only a time of remembrance and celebration, but also a time for reflection on themes of freedom, redemption, and the importance of passing down traditions from generation to generation. It is a significant holiday in the Jewish calendar, observed with reverence and joy by communities around the world. Why? Exodus 12:14-20, where God gives instructions for the celebration of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Jesus kept the Passover and the disciples. During the Last Supper or Passover, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take, eat, this is my body." Matthew 26:26, Mark 14:22, Luke 22:19. He then took the cup of wine, gave thanks, and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." Matthew 26:27-28, Mark 14:23, 24, Luke 22:20. In addition, Paul's writings on the Passover, this was years after the death of Jesus, and the feast was still being kept, not done away with, as the Christians so believe today. 1 Corinthians 5, 7, 8. Get rid of the old yeast so that you may be a new unleavened batch, as you really are. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Therefore, let us keep the festival, not with the old bread leavened with malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. This is a day you are to commemorate. For the generations to come, you shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord, a lasting ordinance. For 7 days you are to eat bread made without yeast. On the first day, remove the yeast from your houses, for whoever eats anything with yeast in it from the first day through the 7th must be cut off from Israel. On the first day, hold a sacred assembly, and another one on the 7th day. Do no work at all on these days except to prepare food for everyone to eat. That is all you may do. The observance of Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread was commanded by God to be observed as an everlasting ordinance, not just for the immediate generation, but for future generations of the Israelites. Therefore, Passover is considered a perpetual holiday for the world, observed annually by all communities around the world. The Jews and the Christians alike, no separation between the whole world, all people will be expected to keep this feast. The Exodus from Egypt. The most significant event associated with Passover is the Exodus from Egypt. Moses led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt after 10 plagues were inflicted upon the Egyptians, culminating in the death of the firstborns. The Israelites, under Moses' leadership, fled Egypt, an event that is commemorated during the Passover holiday. The giving of the law at Mount Sinai. The Israelites arrived at Mount Sinai approximately 50 days after the Exodus. It is believed that it was on this occasion, during the holiday of Shavuot, which comes after Passover, that God gave the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, to the Israelites, including the 10 Commandments. Passover is seen as the precursor to the receiving of the Torah, emphasizing the connection between freedom and responsibility. Modern Israeli history. Passover holds significance in modern Israeli history as well. The establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 and subsequent military conflicts, such as the War of Independence, 1948 to 1949, the Six-Day War, 1967, and the Yom Kippur War, 1973, have often coincided with the Passover holiday. For many Israelis, Passover serves as a time to reflect on the nation's history and its ongoing struggles for freedom and security. In the Gospel accounts, Jesus arrived in Jerusalem during the time of Passover, where he was welcomed by crowds of people. It was during this visit to Jerusalem that he was arrested, tried, and ultimately crucified by the Roman authorities. The Gospel narratives depict these events as occurring in the context of the Passover festival, with references to the Passover meal and the symbolism associated with it. For example, in the Gospel of Matthew 26, 17, 19, it is stated, "On the first day of the festival of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Where do you want us to make preparations for you to eat the Passover?' He replied, 'Go into the city to a certain man and tell him, the teacher says, my appointed time is near. I am going to celebrate the Passover with my disciples at your house.' So the disciples did as Jesus had directed them and prepared the Passover. At the conclusion of Passover, the Torah reading for the 7th-day Passover, the dietary restrictions on chametz, leavened products, are lifted. Passover lasts for 8 days, with an additional day observed as a holiday. This 8th day marks the conclusion of Passover and is known as Shvi'i Shel Pesach, the 7th day of Passover. This event has nothing to do with Easter, nor is Easter even biblical. Until next post, Shalom.